American performance cars have changed dramatically over the years. In the early days, it meant sports cars like the Marmon Model 32, the Mercer Type 35 Raceabout, and the Stutz Bearcat. Introduced in 1909, the 5.2-liter six-cylinder, 32-horsepower Marmon 32 was the basis of the Marmon Wasp race car that won the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911. The Type 35 Mercer Raceabout of 1910 used a 4.8-liter inline-4 with 55 horsepower, and with a top speed of 90 miles an hour, it quickly became one of the dominant race cars of the period. While the original Stutz Bearcat of 1912 used a 6.4-liter 16-valve inline-4 with 60 horsepower. And although Mercer's success was relatively short-lived, Stutz and Marmon would be major players in American performance into the 1930s. But the market was changing quickly, and the four-cylinder was quickly being left in the budget end of the spectrum. Cadillac introduced the first V8 road car in 1915, a 5.2-liter engine producing 70 horsepower. The following year, Packard introduced the Twin 6. This 6.9-liter V12 was good for 88 horsepower. Then in 1930, Cadillac just managed to beat Marmon to market with a V16. The Cadillac 16 was 7.4 liters and produced 165 horsepower at its introduction, while the Marmon 16 was 8 liters with 200 horsepower. But these engines were primarily limited to large, high-end luxury cruisers. Speedsters were more likely to have a straight 8, such as the Auburn 851 Speedster, with a supercharged 4.8-liter straight 8 with 150 horsepower. The Stutz Bearcat dual-valve 32, which used a 5.3-liter 32-valve dual-overhead cam straight 8 for 161 horsepower. A car that some considered to be the last true American sports car of the classic era. Or you could opt for a V8. A mid-30s Cadillac V8 was good for 130 horsepower from 5.8 liters. Or if you were on a budget, a 3.6-liter V8 Ford would get you 90 horsepower at about the same time, quickly becoming the popular choice among hot rodders. Of course, if money was no object, and you wanted to outrun a Mercedes SSK, your only option was a Duesenberg. The 7-liter dual-overhead cam straight 8 was advertised at 265 horsepower. Or you could get the supercharged version with an unheard-of 320, a car capable of 95 miles an hour in second gear and 120 in third. Of course, the Great Depression would put an end to superchargers and overhead cam engines, and it wasn't long before the 12 and 16-cylinder cars would also be gone. But better fuels came out of the war, leading to higher compression engines, like the Hudson Hornet 5-liter straight 6, introduced in 1951 with 145 horsepower. Oldsmobile's new overhead valve 5-liter V8 arrived 2 years earlier with 135 horsepower in the relatively light Model 88. Cadillacs also new the same year 5.4-liter overhead valve V8 had 160 horsepower. And 2 years later, Chrysler introduced the firepower Hemi of the same size with 180 horsepower. Both of these engines, the Chrysler and the Cadillac, would end up in Cunningham sports cars. And there would be several new sports cars hitting the market at the time, American and otherwise. The Nash Healey, the Kaiser Darren, Chevrolet's Corvette, and Ford's Thunderbird, and even the Hawk as either a Studebaker or a Packard. And soon, everyone would have a V8, with the new Chevy small block V8 replacing the flathead Ford as the favorite of hot rodders. But the big power came from increasingly large engines from higher-end standard models, which ranged from Hemi-powered cars like the Chrysler 300 and DeSoto Adventurer to fuel-injected models like the Chevrolet Bel Air and Pontiac Bonneville to the Dodge Custom Royal, culminating in the superstocks of the early 1960s and in horsepower ratings in the neighborhood of 400. Chevrolet's 409 Super Sport was introduced in 1961. Pontiac's 421 Super Duty was potent, particularly in the lightweight Grand Prix of 1962, as was Chrysler's Max Wedge 413 and 426, Dodge Ramcharger and Plymouth Superstock, and Ford's mid-sized 427 Fairlane Thunderbolt, which would naturally lead to the smaller, lighter muscle cars. Chevrolet's 396 Super Sport Chevelle, Pontiac's Tempest GTO, Oldsmobile's Cutlass 442, and Buick's Skylark Grand Sport 400 at GM, Ford's Fairlane and Torino XL, GT, and Cobra, Mercury's Comet GT and Cyclone Spoiler, each giving the possibility of a 390, a 427, 428, or 429. Chrysler's Plymouth GTX and Roadrunner, and Dodge Coronet RT, Super B, and Charger RT with a 383 or 440 wedge or a 426 Hemi, and the AMC Rebel SST and The Machine with a 390, followed shortly thereafter to a transition to pony cars, the Ford Mustang and Mercury Cougar, the Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird, the Plymouth Barracuda and Dodge Challenger, and of course the AMC Javelin. And although these cars came with big blocks, it would be the better handling small block cars that would carry the market into the 1970s. Cars like the Boss 302 Mustang, the Z28 LT1 Camaro, the TA Challenger, and AAR Cuda, the primary exception being the Firebird Trans Am, the most popular and last holdout of the big-engined pony cars, being offered till the end of the decade. But let's not forget the other performance compacts, the Dodge Dart GTS, the Plymouth Duster 340, the Chevrolet Chevy 2 Nova Super Sport and its later GM counterparts, Ford's Grabber Maverick and its Mercury Comet GT Twin, AMC's SC Rambler and Hornet SC 360, as well as others, as performance was becoming less focused on horsepower and more focused on handling and braking and on less weight, meaning smaller vehicles like the Mustang II and the Chevrolet Monza Spyder and its other GM variants. These small V8s would carry into the 1980s performance world. The less than impressive Ford 302 became the iconic 5.0 of Mustangs and Thunderbirds. The common Chevrolet 350 would be the high-output 5.7-liter in the Chevrolet Corvette, Camaro IROC Z, and Pontiac Trans Am GTA. Even Chrysler's generic 318 would be the 5.2-liter Magnum V8 in performance vehicles before the end of the decade. But the move was towards smaller turbos. Ford's 2.3-liter Turbo 4 provided more performance in cars like the Thunderbird and Cougar, if not in the Mustang. At Chrysler, that meant both the Mitsubishi 2.6-liter turbo and their own 2.2-liter turbo in various tunes in practically everything, from the Chrysler LeBaron in its numerous forms to the Dodge Daytona Turbo Z, Omni GLHS, Shadow ES Turbo, and Spirit RT. At GM, Buick's 3.8-liter V6 turbo was the go-to engine, perhaps best known as the power source of the Grand National, but also appearing in things ranging from the GMC Cyclone and Typhoon to the 20th anniversary Trans Am. But once the new generations of V8 started showing up, the time of the turbo was over. The LS1 was introduced in the 1997 Corvette to become yet another Chevy V8 popular with hot rodders, and the return of the Chrysler Hemi in 2005 arrived just in time for a retro muscle car revival, with the reappearance of the Pontiac GTO and the Dodge Charger and a retro Mustang, to be joined a few years later by a revived retro Challenger and a retro Camaro. And the smaller turbo engines would come back around as the performance option for more mainstream models, but it was V8 muscle that would climb to whole new levels. The push for electric vehicles isn't necessarily bad news for performance. The Tesla Model S has certainly proven the straight-line performance and the torque on demand that an electric motor provides.
We're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed. They've gone to plaid.
Although cost, weight, heat, and range are only some of the limitations they still have to overcome.
Well, why don't we take a 5-minute break? Smoke if you got 'em.
A desire for performance has been a driving force in the auto industry since the beginning, and although performance priorities may change, as long as there is a performance market, there will be performance cars. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.